Okay, this is J-Man Time, and today I have a video on the last surviving ships from the World War I era Austro-Hungarian Navy, also known as the KUK Kriegsmarine or Kriegsmarine. During the First World War, the Austro-Hungarian Navy actually had two separate navies, the ocean-going Navy and the Austro-Hungarian River Flotillas, River Navy. And the river navy was based in the Danube River, at the time the largest and longest river to flow in the territory of Austria-Hungary, and even in the secessionist states that came afterwards. Now, at the end of World War I, the Austro-Hungarian Empire was pretty much dismantled by the Allied powers and the secessionist states that came out of it. Austria-Hungary later became the states of Austria, Hungary, and the state of Serbs, Croats, and Slovenes, which was later renamed Yugoslavia. The breakup of the Austro-Hungarian Empire, all of the naval assets of the empire were divided between the victorious Allied powers and the secessionist states. And over the decades, most of those ships were either scrapped or sunk later on during the Second World War. But a handful of the Austro-Hungarian warships still survive to this day. So let's go over some of the surviving warships from the old Austro-Hungarian Navy, or the KUK Kriegsmarine or Kriegsmarine. And the first ship on the list is the SMS Leitha. It was a Maros-class river monitor that was constructed between 1869 and 1871, and she was launched in 1872. She was launched with her sister ship, the SMS Maros, who pretty much had the same displacement as the Leitha. Leitha and her sister ship, Maros, had a displacement of 367 tons. Their main armaments were two 150mm, 15cm Swiss-made Warndorf cannons, breech-loading cannons. These were later replaced in 1892 with one 120mm Skoda L33 main gun, along with two Salvatore Dormo's machine guns. In the earlier 1900s, she was fitted with two 47mm Skoda guns, and later on, during World War I in 1914-1915, she was fitted with two 66mm Skoda L37 and L42 secondary guns. Her armor thickness was 26mm, and she had a speed of 9.6 knots or 11 miles per hour, and she had a crew between 30 and 60 depending on the time period. Now, the Leitha and her sister ship Maros served during the First World War on the Danube River for the Austro-Hungarian Navy and was involved in the invasion of Serbia in 1914 and also the invasion of Montenegro, and subsequent battles between the Austro-Hungarian River Navy and the Serb Navy between 1914 and 1915, and again in 1918, this time against France also. At the end of World War I, the Leitha and her sister ship Maros ended up in Hungary, but the Maros was later sold to Austria. 1919, Hungary, the newly formed state of Hungary, had a communist revolution and was renamed the Hungarian Soviet Republic. This later led to a conflict between the Hungarian Soviet Republic and Romania, which resulted in the Hungarian-Romanian War of 1919, and the Leitha was also involved in that conflict. There was also a monitor revolt, in which the Leitha, along with several other river monitors serving in Hungary, later rose up against the Soviet government in Hungary. This was quickly crushed, and the monitors were later recaptured. After the Hungarian-Romanian War and the monitor revolts of 1919, she was later converted into an elevator ship and later a gravel barge between 1921 and 1928. She was later purchased by the Folka Gravel Mining Company and served as an elevator ship for that company all the way up until 1992 under the name the FK201, or the barge number FK201. FK201 was later sold to a Swiss company, and she served in that capacity all the way up until 2005, where she was abandoned at a Hungarian shipyard. In the same year, 2005, A group of Hungarian naval historians rediscovered the ship and asked the Hungarian government to restore the ship as a museum vessel. This didn't happen until 2009, and between 2009 and 2010, the gravel barge FK-201 was later rebuilt into her original form, the SMS Leitha, and the reconstruction was based on her 1872 configuration. Fast forward to today, the Leitha can still be seen in Budapest harbor of the Danube River to this very day as a tourist vessel. She serves as the last surviving 19th century monitor to serve in the Austro-Hungarian Navy. Her sister ship, the SMS Maros, seems to have disappeared. She was later sold to Austria in 1920, but seems to have either been scrapped or must have been lost somewhere. The Maros might have also have been converted into a gravel barge. And if this happens, she might actually still exist out there somewhere in Austria. But that is not known, and only the SMS Leitha survives out of the two ships from that class. And that brings me to the next ship on the list, the SMS Delmont, or Delmat. The Delmont was a Austro-Hungarian royal yacht and gunboat that was constructed originally in 1896. Her original name was Osoro, and she was constructed by a French company and later sold to Austria-Hungary to act as the royal yacht for the Habsburg family and for various Austro-Hungarian naval commanders later on during the First World War. Her displacement is 267 tons. She really didn't have any main armaments. She didn't have any permanent main armaments, but she did have at least one or two saluting guns of at least the 37 to 47 millimeter caliber throughout the years off and on. And her speed was 10.8 knots, or 19.8 kilometers per hour, or 13 miles per hour, and she had a crew of 20. The Osoro, as she was originally known as, served as a yacht, a royal yacht for the Austro-Hungarian Navy, all the way up until the end of World War I. During World War I, she also served as a torpedo boat command ship for the Austro-Hungarian ocean-going Navy. So technically, the SM Delmont is also one of the last surviving warships, is the last surviving Austro-Hungarian warship from Austria-Hungary's ocean-going Navy. After World War I, she was later into Yugoslavia, the state of Yugoslavia, and she later served as the Yugoslav gunboat Vila, also known as the armed yacht Vila, in 1920. In 1941, Yugoslavia was invaded by the Axis powers, and she was actually captured by the Italians. The Italians later turned her into a gunboat for the Italian occupation forces in Yugoslavia, and she was renamed the Italian gunboat Fata. Later on, in 1941, the Yugoslav partisans later recaptured the vessel and renamed her Orin, temporarily. And this is until Yugoslavia later became the Federal Republic of Yugoslavia under Marshal Tito. In 1954, she was converted back into a royal yacht under the name the Istranka. And Istranka served until 1971 in the Yugoslav Navy as one of the many yachts / command ships. In 1971, she was purchased to be used as a civilian restaurant known as the Istranka floating restaurant, but this didn't go so well, and eventually in 1989 the ship was abandoned and eventually sank at her moorings. She lay abandoned in the harbor of Split, or Split Harbor, all the way up until the year 2005, where she was later salvaged Croatian Maritime Museum. In 2006, the ship was finally raised from her watery grave. She later sank again several years later and had to be raised again in 2014. Since 2014, the MS Delmont, also known in Croatia as the Istranka, has been going through a slow conversion process into a museum ship. So far, as of 2020, the ship has not been completed, but at least her hull has been restored somewhat. Most of the rust and barnacles has been scraped off, and the hull is slowly undergoing a process of repainting. I don't know if they're going to rebuild her superstructure or add any of her saluting guns. Hopefully they do, but as of 2020, the MS Delmont is still undergoing conservation/reconstruction as a museum ship in the harbor of Split in modern-day Croatia. The last ship on the list is a ship that I actually did several years ago, and that is the SMS Bodrog, known today in Serbia as the Serbian monitor Sava. Now, the SMS Bodrog was a river monitor that was constructed in 1904 as part of the Temiz class of river monitor that was to serve in the Danube River Flotilla of the Austro-Hungarian River Navy, along with her sister ships, the Temiz. And these two ships were constructed between 1904 and 1905. The ships had a displacement of 440 tons. Their main armament was two 120mm 4.7-inch Skoda L35 guns, and they were also fitted with one 120mm 4.7-inch Skoda L10 howitzer in the rear area. She was also fitted with two 37mm guns, and her armor thickness was between 25 and 75 millimeters, although her hull armor was only between 25 and 40 millimeters. She had a crew of 86 officers and sailors, and she has a speed of 13 knots or 24 kilometers per hour or 15 miles per hour. Bodrog and her sister ship, the Temiz, served in the Austro-Hungarian Navy from 1904, and the Bodrog herself was the ship that fired the opening salvos of World War I. 28th of July 1914, the Bodrog, along with two other monitors, entered the harbor of Belgrade and later opened fire on the Serbian port of Belgrade, along with the Serbian coastal defense batteries in the area, pretty much starting World War I. So the SMS Bodrog is equivalent to the German battleship Schleswig-Holstein, which was the battleship that opened the first shots of World War II. Unlike the Schleswig-Holstein, the Bodrog actually survives to this day. She was involved in the invasion of Serbia, and she also assisted the Austro-Hungarian army against the Russian invasion of Austria-Hungary. She also served in the Austro-Hungarian offensive against the Romanian forces. In 1916, Romania entered World War I on the Allied side and actually fought Austria-Hungary and Bulgaria. And Bodrog, along with other monitors of the Danube River Flotilla, fought against some of the Romanian warships that were also based on the river. After World War I, the Bodrog was later given to the newly formed state of Yugoslavia, and she was renamed the Yugoslavian monitor Sava, along with her sister ship Temiz, which was later renamed the Yugoslavian monitor Vardar. In 1941, the German-led Axis powers invaded Yugoslavia in April 1941, and both Sava and Vardar were charged with laying mines in the Danube River near the Romanian border in an attempt to stop both the Romanian and the German Danube River flotillas from reaching the Yugoslav region. Unfortunately, this didn't last very long, as the Axis powers were advancing at a pretty rapid rate, and on the 11th of April 1941, the commander of the Yugoslavian Navy ordered all of the capital ships of the river flotilla to be scuttled, and Sava and Vardar were both scuttled in 1941. Later on, she was salvaged by the Axis puppet state of Croatia, also known as the independent state of Croatia, in 1942, and she was later pressed into service under the name Sava also. Later on, in 1944, when the independent state of Croatia was pretty much collapsing along with the rest of the Balkan Axis powers, she was later scuttled on the 9th of September 1944 in order to keep her from being captured by the Yugoslav partisans, Soviet forces that were advancing along the Danube River. And she pretty much stayed scuttled all the way up until 1952. In 1952, the Federal Republic of Yugoslavia decided to raise the vessel again, and she was reinstated into the Navy of the Federal Republic of Yugoslavia in 1952, and she served for another 10 years until 1962, where she was finally decommissioned. After being decommissioned by the Federal Republic of Yugoslavia, she pretty much lay abandoned for many years afterwards. Eventually, Yugoslavia collapsed into civil war in the 1990s, and in 2005, the ship was finally rediscovered or salvaged by the newly independent Serbian government. But it wasn't until 2014 that the Serbian government began the process of restoration. First, the ship was beached in 2014, and later on, the Serbian military defense ministry based in Belgrade decided to preserve the ship or restore the ship as a museum ship. And this process didn't begin until about 2016, where the ship was finally taken into dry dock to be restored as a museum ship. The restoration project lasted all the way up until 2019, and in January 2019, the Serbian monitor or Yugoslav monitor Sava was finally relaunched as a floating working museum ship. It can now be seen on the Serbian side of the Danube River near the Belgrade military base in Serbia, making her one of the last Yugoslav heavy warships or heavy river monitors to survive the test of time. And that's pretty much it. These were the last surviving warships from the Austro-Hungarian Empire. Although the MS Delmont was meant to be a yacht, she also served as a gunboat off and on throughout the decades. So she does count as a warship. If I had to pick, I would say the Delmont was actually the most interesting to me because it's the one that I didn't actually know about until making this video. So what do you all think of these surviving Austro-Hungarian warships? Please tell me in the comment section below. And which World War I or II era country should I do research videos on surviving warships for next? I was thinking of doing Japan or maybe the UK. There are some surviving World War I and World War II era warships from the Empire of Japan and from the United Kingdom. But I also thought about doing the Ottoman Empire, as there are some ships from that navy that still survives to this very day. But what do you all think of these surviving Austro-Hungarian warships? Please tell me in the comment section below. And until next time, this was J-Man Time signing off.